All right, let's get going then. Thanks for making it thus far. Thanks to Kevin and Marg for having us here. For those who I don't know yet, my name is Tim Nikolsky. I work at a place called Virtual School. Before that, it was called Distance Ed. So I teach music investigation and previously style and comp. Thank you for participating in everything that you have contributed so far. I've been involved in stacks of really fantastic conversations with people. I guess the reason why I'm here also is that over the last few years I have been involved in contributing to the study design review and putting that together. So if you need to hate someone, you can hate me. That's absolutely fine. Why are we here? I think part of the reason why we're here is that what we have been doing, to a certain extent, has not really been working. Now, that's a controversial thing. It works in many different circumstances. But the chief remit that I've tried to push for in the study design review is that we have to redesign the study design and the educational offerings so that it is appropriate for the other 95% of students that currently do not study music at VCE level. What's happened is that we've made increasingly elitist subjects where only the highest of the performing students will ever elect to do those particular subjects. That's a problem. That's a problem because if you've got, say, 10 A-mus students that are doing music investigation, discerning between those and ranking between those, they still have to be distributed over the bell curve. And we all know that is highly inequitable. A mark or two here or there can make a 42 or 36 study score. What I would like to do is press the reset button on our study design and be encompassing, encouraging of more diverse music making and be much more inclusive about what it means to be a music student. I think some of the things, please, for those who have come in, thanks for joining us. Please come, plenty of seats down the front, make yourselves comfortable. Say that's your student here. Please, come on in, find a seat, plenty of seats down the front. I think the problem that has happened our Venn diagram doesn't intersect. This is a problem, okay? What we need to do in this reset, wow, that really didn't work. We need to exist in this area here. And what I'm increasingly finding in my own education context is that I'm needing to make that distance and to come across to where my students are at. Hello everyone, please come in, plenty of good seats down the front. So this area here, we need to be much more student focused and much more where our students are into. There is an evolving new musicology that is currently being articulated that we need to be involved with. We need to get our heads around. We need to evolve our practice to encompass this new musicology that is currently being articulated. That's scary. Change is going to be scary. The thing that I'm really confident about and what I'm really, really encouraged about is this new study design is actually really exciting. There is more possibility. There's more possibility for students to articulate who they are in music. There's more possibility, more opportunity to value their creativity and what they bring. This is really important. And I think nearly up until this point, there has not been enough focus on that creative element and really valuing that explicitly in a study design. So I think with contemporary performance, we actually have an opportunity to really articulate that, encourage that, assess that as well, but to really foster that in the next generation. So I think that's really, really positive. I've got plenty more to say on that, but I'm going to stop talking now and move into the moderator role. We have some fantastic speakers for you this afternoon. I'm looking forward to the conversations that are going to ensue. If you've got a burning question, please put up your hand and I will come over and deliver a microphone for you. But looking forward to this afternoon's session. Thank you for your attention. And who's up first? Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Round of applause for Tim. I'll take the round of applause, but I haven't done anything yet. My name is Scott Mangos, and I teach at Mount Clear College on Wadawurrung country. And today I acknowledge that we're on the country of the Wurundjeri people who have lived and loved and learnt here for millennia, and that's what they continue to do, and we're going to do some of that today. Live, love, and learn. And hopefully we can work towards true reconciliation. So, VCE music, contemporary performance. My big mantra through all of this, and always, is read the study design. And we've heard it quite a few times today. And I don't know if you're on the Facebook group that operates with the VCE music teachers, and the amount of questions that come up that could just be answered with, read the study design. So what I've got here is my interpretation of the study design. And so I'm going to look at a quick little overview of my interpretation of this, and then a bit of area one, then I'm going to pass over to my colleagues who will do the rest, because they've read the study design. So, I don't know about you, we're all very busy people. And, you know, as music teachers, we would like to think we're the busiest in the school. And life can get very busy, and I've got a 6-week-old daughter, and so life is very busy. And I know when I look at the new study design, I want to go, what's the least amount of work I need to do to go from today to day one next year? Is anyone else feeling that with me? Yeah, thanks for the honest people, and thanks to the people who thought it. Okay. So what I've sort of done is I sort of thought, let's go quickly through the area of studies, my interpretations, my wordings of what it is at the moment compared to what it looks like going forward. Hey, and if you're taking photos on iPads and all stuff, this gets pushed out anyway, just letting you know. So, at the moment, area of study 1, prepare a program. Same thing in the new study, yeah? Except now we have a performers and statement, and one of them must be reimagined, okay? Number 2, the tech stack is as it currently is, okay? And then obviously the new one, experimentation and showing what you're demonstrating, the students are demonstrating what they are working on with their reimagining. Area study 3, oral and music language, not music theory. I got told off for putting that down, okay? Language and analysis, and that continues on, you know, to a broad degree in the new one. And then Unit 4, these are the sax as well. I was sort of just focusing on the sax side. I should have said that, right? All of that's in the study design. Now, we've looked at Venn diagrams. We've looked at some rubrics this morning. And so I thought it's really important sometimes to break down all the sax scores to see what we're actually teaching and how much it's worth. So this is me just taking the percentages off the study design and putting it into a pie chart here. And the little one that's missing up the top is the Unit 4 element. It's worth 5% as part of the discussing and demonstrating of techniques. So I think that's the showing of the new reimagined work in the SAC. So if we put that into the whole study score, right? So 50% on the on the external performance exam. We've got our SACs there in Unit 3, Unit 4, and the written exam. So I just like to see this to know, where should I be spending my time? I don't know about you, but this is what I think when I'm coming towards a new study design. 62% of our score next year for this subject comes from playing. Why do we put so much class time into the written spoken work? Let's go back to that Venn diagram. Well, it's not a Venn diagram, it's a pie chart. I was very serious there for a second. I had everyone and then I stuffed up. It's the first mistake I've made this year. So, there we have it. 62% of the mark for next year's, and this is across the year, comes from playing. When you add up the performance exam, as well as having to demonstrate the reimagining and stuff like that, that's the numbers I've come up with. All right? I'm no mathematician, but that's what I've come up with. So I'm just going to, think on that. I think that's really important. So here we go. I'm going to talk about outcome 1, or area of study 1. This is from the study design. Funny that, okay? And it's worth reading, but read it from the study design, okay? Okay. So you need to create a program which is going to include a reimagining of a piece and a piece from an Australian artist. Also includes a performance statement of intent. Now, this has been around in a few different study designs at the moment. Okay, so I know, for instance, any vet music teachers out there? Ooh, okay. So it's in the vet music study design. And so I'm seeing a lot of similarities here between VCE music contemporary performance and vet music industry performance specialisation. And so, yes, think lots of other study designs do this. Dance and drama do this to some degree. I'm going to present this program and this is what I want you to get out of it. And so that's my interpretation here of this performer's statement of intent. So don't think that you have to reinvent the wheel. There are other people doing it already. So, group or solo. Now this is a little bugbear of mine. You know when you come to conferences like this and people go, oh, so do you do group or solo at your school? And I go, I do both, because that's what the study design says we have to do. All right? And the whole idea of having separate subjects, separate schools, we're a group school, we're a solo school for our performers in their end of year exams, that's 2 study designs ago. And I really struggle to comprehend that. So, students should be given an informed choice. I know that with my drummers at my school, solo drummers don't seem to get as good of a mark as the group drummers do. That's just my anecdotal experience. So we would quite often, unless they're a super high flyer, we'll direct kids into it, but we give them full choice. For instance, studio art doesn't dictate the medium that the students have to present in. It doesn't say, okay, we're a photography school, so all studio art students are going to do photography. So I think that's really worth thinking about and giving students some real agency, because this subject gives students real agency. Obviously, some instruments lend themselves better to a solo or group. Some students lend themselves better to a solo or group. My school has a lot of country bus travellers. And so, working in a group can be really tricky when they've got to travel an hour out to their home, so they can't really do after-school rehearsals. And I've also seen that successful groups in vet music make successful groups in VCE. And I think that's going to be more so the case now as well, because they don't have to maybe play that spectrum that's in the current study design. So then I got thinking about reimagining, and what does that look like? So I was thinking you could link it to an analysis task, like it currently is, think of the current study design, section A, question 3 on the exam, with that comparison. One year they did Crazy and they had the Niles Barkley version and the Scott Bradley version. I'm thinking that's a really easy way to get people thinking about, or students, about their reimagining. I also think it's really important to do some teacher-led playing sessions experimenting with different grooves and feels. We'll get to that in a second. Student audio or video diaries or portfolio of ideas. We've heard some great stuff about that earlier today, about portfolios. Getting students to find different examples of this piece performed. I don't know about you, but I'm a bit younger than some people here, judging by the hair dye they use. But when we're back at school, I only had CDs back in the day, whereas now you can go on YouTube and you can see a million different versions of one song. And the students know way more than I do, and they'll know way more than you do. So why don't we make them the experts in leading this? Use different elements from different versions to sort of recreate their piece, and students to be able to identify what makes their version different. What makes Scott Mangos's version of this song different to the one he saw on YouTube and he really liked and almost copied. I think that's going to be really key moving forward. So I was thinking with this playing session idea, maybe you could pick a song. I've probably put this in the wrong order, if I'm honest. The songs down the bottom right, they're easy songs, right? So you've got Seven Nation Army, which if you do year 8 music or 7 music, you've probably heard to death, but at least your kids know it, right? Wild Thing, that's probably a generation ago, let's be honest, but it's a crazy song. Blister in the Sun, not great lyrics, but it's a great riff. And even nursery rhymes. So pick a really easy song that we're going to be able to learn really quickly in a classroom session to do it as like the original. And then, now we'll go to the top section, let's start playing it maybe in a relative minor. Let's see what happens there. And so that's going to take some theory knowledge, or music language knowledge, sorry, not theory knowledge. Maybe we can look at different drum beats, we can swing it, we could put it in a reggae, we could half-time it, anything like that, different tempos. So we're doing it's a scaffolding exercise within the classroom, rather than just going, see yous, all right? We're doing it as a class to give some ideas that they can then implement themselves, rather than just copying off YouTube. Because let's be honest, that's what a lot of kids are going to try to do. And obviously, also, experimentation through a door as well. If they put it in and, can I speed it up? What if I slow it down? What if I put this, different beat behind it, a trap beat or something like that? I did this year with my Year 11s for the composition task for Unit 2, Outcome 4. I got them to do a nursery rhyme. They've had to reimagine it. I've set them up a little bit so they've got some of the skills ready for next year. All right. This has been touched on a little bit today as well, but I don't think it's given enough credit at all. Use your instrumental teachers more. I'm not an instrumental teacher, by the way. I just teach classroom. But if we look at the marks that were on those pie charts, 50% of that score is coming from the instrumental music teacher. That's a lot. Imagine if you said to an English class, go and find a tutor, and they'll make up 50% of your mark. That seems a bit crazy. But we work with what we work with, right? So, I think it's really important. I've got it down the bottom here. Communicate early, communicate often, communicate well. If you're lucky enough that all your students learn on site at your school, fantastic. If not, make sure you're communicating really well about what you expect an instrumental teacher to be doing in your subject with your students. If you have groups, could you arrange an instrumental music teaching session for them as a group weekly, not just as individual musicians? This one is something I implemented a couple of years ago. So, does anyone have groups at their school currently? Great. And quite often we'll go, well, you hear this in a lot of different places, you guys figure it out and I'll see you at the end of the year. Or, with check-ins throughout the year in terms of a workshop or something like that. They don't get instruction on how to work as a group. So, what I was thinking is that one of my instrumental teachers had a half-hour spot, so I organised that as part of the rotation, they would spend some time with them. And it worked great guns, absolutely. So if you're a clarinet player, you're working with your clarinet teacher on your solo stuff, they're focusing on that. But when you've got a group with a guitarist and a drummer and all that kind of stuff going on, or whatever instrumentation is, there's no one to bring them together sometimes. And that's left to the classroom teacher, and it's too much work, I've got to get through all this oral and all this written theory, you guys just figure it out. So I think it's really important that we do that, especially moving forward. This is a big change for everyone, this new study design, and it may impact, how instrumental teachers approach their lessons as well. So it's been mentioned a few times today as well, so it's worth keeping in mind. I think that's all I had. Yeah, how good is that? I just want to go back to this one again. Just going to keep that up there. If you've got 4 hours a week with your students, how many hours are you spending on playing, which makes up 62% of their mark next year? That's something that I'm going to leave you with today. Thank you.
Is there any burning questions for Scott whilst we're doing the changeover? Or we leave them to the end, perhaps? Great job, Scott.
Thank you.
Is there a PLC person that has a password?
I'll come up with a microphone so that the cameras can capture it.
Can they present as a soloist and as an ensemble member in contemporary?
It's implied in the study design, really, that students need to be, you need to collaborate. You need to work with other musicians. That could be a piano accompanist, could be a diversity of ensembles. The general advice is that, wow, that's really short delay. It's really messing me up. I think the thing is to keep the ensemble as efficient as you can, so that there's not much setup time. But I'm imagining and maybe preempting that one of the criteria is going to be how successfully the candidate works with that accompanist in a music-making collaboration. So that could be empathy with your accompanist. It could take on a number of different things in a contemporary setting. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I think we're still setting up. So another question?
Again, just in this dilemma that I think people are thinking about in terms of the exam with, again, we might have a solo performer, but their accompanied piece or their ensemble piece. I envisage that my class will have perhaps 4 performers, and potentially all 4 will go solo, but it would be in the interest of our class that their ensemble piece is worked in the class, and therefore that ensemble piece is the one that goes to all 4 exams. And yet the advice that we're hearing is to keep it efficient, perhaps only have an accompanist, and that kind of takes away from what we would achieve in our classroom.
Yeah, I'll take that as a comment as well, and I completely understand what you're saying. There is a specific FAQ that deals with that very question that I'm sure the VCEA would refer us to. Yeah, there is actually a question that directly answers that question. Are we good to move on?
We're good.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Gorman. I teach at Craigieburn Secondary College up north. So thank you, Scott, for launching into Outcome 1. I'm going to talk a bit about Outcome 2, but I thought beforehand it's probably important that we acknowledge and understand that everyone in this room has a different context. So whatever is said today might be really fantastic in this room. I remember being a beginning teacher and leaving the conference and then going, how do I make that work in my school where I don't have any instrumental teachers, or where I have 3 sessions a week instead of 5, or how does that look in a different context? So for reference, I teach in a government 7 to 12 school with very high levels of disadvantage and disengagement from students and families. Most of our students come to us with below average or below expected literacy and numeracy skills, which presents a myriad of problems or challenges in the classroom. We have limited resources in one capacity in terms of spaces to use and resourcing of time for our students, but we are very lucky that we have a lot of equipment and a really great instrumental team. All of our students currently do group performance. We are yet to have someone, we're in our 3rd year of VCE, yet to have anyone that's come through that is interested or has the capacity to complete solo, but that might change, as Scott was mentioning before, with this new study design and the flexibility that it offers there. All our students also have an instrumental lesson once a week at our school, so I'm very lucky that all of the students in my class are taught by instrumental staff in my team as well. So the communication there is a little bit easier, but I also know there are a lot of people who have external teachers, and I myself teach private students that are at other schools, so that just presents another consideration. We also have built regular performances at our college, whether they're full-scale things or little thrown-together lunchtime things, just because we found it was really difficult to keep, particularly our group kids that are doing music because they didn't know what else to do. Not those kids that live and breathe music, but keep them hooked and eye on the prize for that performance outcome. So just a bit about that. The overall approach that I take to music and that I will be doing with the new study design, with the contemporary stream, is an extension of the musical futures kind of approach about getting kids to play first and we'll fill the gaps later, which kind of fits with Scott's wonderful pie chart. We need kids playing music. Kids that come into this subject that aren't already excellent musicians or decent musicians, they're not going to be able to stay engaged or access that content if they're not feeling some form of success. By week 2, you are playing a song, you are a musician, let's go. There's a big emphasis on oral skills. So again, if I've got kids that walk out at the end of the year that can hear a song, pick up an instrument, play it, that is an outcome that we're going for. And of course, that explicit group work, developing arrangements and their interpretations of their songs together. So a focus of mine that I want to talk about today is about accessibility. A lot of students at my school are new arrivals to Australia, really, as I said, low literacy skills, or students who've maybe been in the country for 3 months and all of a sudden turn up in my Unit 3 class. Which I've learned, talking about that, is a shock to some people, and whether music might be the right place for these kids. But if I've been in the country for 3 months and I get given the choice between doing physics or music, if I have no experience in either, I'm probably going to choose music. So we need to make sure that our space is welcoming and inclusive and accessible for all of those students, regardless of their prior experience. So how can I ensure that my teaching is inclusive and accessible for multiple entry points and skill levels, still extending those top kids that have listened to every word that's come out of your mouth since they're in Year 7? How do we cater to all of those different levels? So the approach I've taken with this is to give some tangible suggestions of what I'm actually going to do in my class. What are my kids going to do, say, make or write next year? And what will that look like after I've read the study design and interpreted those key knowledge and skills? So for outcome 1, research task, this is something that I do this year anyway. There's a key skill in there about using research to inform your interpretation of works. So thinking about doing an analysis of their written works, an analysis of styles, because we've got these criteria that talk about a variety of styles and contrasting styles. And we've got kids that come in that can't tell you the difference between a blues song and a rock song. So how are we actually building that foundation? We're going to tell kids to go and reimagine a work in a new style. They need to have some reference point as to what those styles are and what the conventions are that make those different, so they can then start to apply it to their own work. Building on Scott's idea of those teacher-led experimentation sessions, I think that is a really great way to get kids thinking about ideas without us saying, change it like this, or listen to this YouTube version and do something like that, but not that. And they say, well, how do I do it? And you go, I don't know, just be creative. How are we actually modelling that and scaffolding that in a variety of different ways, and giving those prompts about play it like a reggae song now, or can you change this from simple time to compound time? See what happens, and it might be a mess and we all laugh about it, but it might be something really cool. And the statement of intention, which I'm thinking for my kids that don't like to write or spend 15 minutes writing half a sentence, how am I going to get these kids to write something really clear? We can view a video or recording of a live performance, or even better, if I can organise for my instrumental team to come in and perform. Write the statement of intention for those performers. What do you think they were trying to achieve? And get that practice of putting into words what these performers might be trying to communicate to their audience. For outcome 2, all of the things that I'm going to do in outcome 2, I'm going to use a digital portfolio. I'm also a VCE media teacher, so I'm taking the approach that I would take in any visual arts subject of having a portfolio. When I read the study design, it was really clear to me, or suggested to me, that this is an emphasis on the process that our kids are following. It's not actually about the end result. It's not about the reimagined work. That's for outcome 1. This is about how are they getting there and how are they showing the process of developing this work. So I will be using Microsoft Sway. There's a whole lot of other wonderful online platforms that you can use, but something that kids can record, they can write in, they can put videos, photos, they can record examples of them practicing at home, they can annotate things all in one place. I think it's really important. Also, again, for that accessibility, showing these kids, look where you were and look where you are now. We've got that really clear, tangible evidence of their progress. So the things that I would put into their portfolio. Very first thing, a comparative analysis, like that question 3 of the current exam. A cover and original. What's the difference? Start using that music language to describe it. What can you identify stylistically differently? Researching, so annotating a couple of different examples of the same work, and evaluating the effect each interpretation has on the audience. Start to link to that statement of intent. Experimentation exercises. This is something I've pulled kind of from the media world, where let's try something, record it, so film it or audio record or reflect on it, a written record. What did you do? What did you try? I played the chorus of this song, but instead of playing it in 4/4, I played it in 6/8. Kind of made it up. This is what it sounds like. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Let's evaluate what worked well and what didn't work, and then maybe that leads to another one. I'm going to try it again, but this time I'm going to tighten up that rhythm. I'm going to think about, X, Y, and Z, but having that really clear progression of how kids have developed their reimagined work. And then the process of reimagining that. So how are you talking to your group about this? Because we want a collaborative approach to the performance exam. We want a collaborative approach to reimagining the work. So what kind of conversations are you having together? And that might be screenshots of a group chat. It might be minutes of a prac class they had together. Today we discussed this, this and this. We decided that he'd sound really good doing that guitar solo and she should play quieter, whatever it might be. Having a chord chart, annotating against that. This is where the build is going to be. This is where the crescendo will be, and start bringing in some of that music language. Feedback from listeners for each iteration of the reimagined piece. So we talk about, in the study design, it refers to this SAC being not necessarily having the end product in mind. So here's where my reimagined piece is at the moment. I played it for my instrumental music teacher. This is what they thought and suggestions that they made. So I made that, and now I've played it again. I played it at a lunchtime concert, and my friend said that was really cool, but it didn't sound like a rock song. So now I'm going to reflect on that and make another change. Having those iterations, so it's not just, I decided to reimagine this from a rock song to a reggae song, and here's the end. Because we can't actually authenticate the students' work and know that who did that, and how are we assessing the students' understanding if we've just got an end product. Tying in loosely to the tech SAC, or the suggestions that link to the current outcome 2, what are the challenges that kids need to overcome to realise that reimagined work? Because it talks about the intention. Here is what I want to do, so what am I going to have to do to get there? And that might be a technique. It might be something about their role within the ensemble and how their musical line functions. Any of those things, with an identification of the skill required from them as opposed to the task, which I talk a lot about at the moment when I have kids going, the challenge in this song is that I need to learn the chords in the verse. And I say, well, once you do that, what do you need to, how do you get better at that? You either know it or you don't. So we talk about controlling transitions between the chords, or we talk about correct finger placement, or really trying to drill down into what is the kid doing to get better. The plan of attack, maybe a timeline or a schedule. What are you going to do to get there? How are you going to include this into your rehearsal or your practice? We have rehearsals on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm going to practice at home on Tuesday, and here's what I'm going to practice. here's a reflection once a week of what I've done this week, set myself a goal, didn't do it because I went to the footy instead. But I promise next week I will, whatever they're going to write about. But again, some kind of documentation, so you get those kids at the end that haven't put in the work and you go, well, we've got 6 weeks here. You know, you can't turn around to me and say, it's my fault. The last part of that is, what will the SAC look like? I know this is really like, cool, here's what one teacher's going to do, but what do I actually do to assess that satisfactory completion of outcome 2? It does say a discussion. I think I'm just going to have my students talk through their portfolio and elaborate on the process that they've followed using the performance descriptors when they come out and some form of rubric that will indicate, you know, exactly what we're looking for. The thing that I've put in there at the end, regular authentication conferences, this is again, so we're not getting to the end and I've got a kid that's done no work for 6 weeks and then turns up with a really whiz-bang portfolio and I say, where does this come from? And they've actually just, their cousin who did Year 12 music last year just wrote it for them, or they've recycled it. How do we actually make sure that this is this kid's work when they're talking through it, asking them some unprepared questions? And if they can't authenticate what they're presenting to you, then there's, you know, maybe an alternative task or an alternative opportunity to demonstrate that understanding might be required. Outcome 3, I'm not going to talk about this too much because Emily's going to go in depth with a nice example for you, but this idea of an integrated approach, I think a lot of people kind of do this already with the study design, but really trying to not separate theory, music language, and prac. We've got kids, I know my Year 12s this year are so good at rhythmic dictation, and then we go, well, tell me what the rhythm is that you're playing in that solo, and they go, oh, da-da-da. And they can't actually articulate what they're playing in a song because they're not drawing the connections. That, you know, that thing we did yesterday is the same concept we're talking about. Also looking at stylistically specific links. So again, having that multiple exposures to what are stylistic conventions. Instead of us just using the words, that's really jazzy. What does that mean? I've got a drummer at the moment who talks about how much he loves jazz. He has no idea what jazz is. He thinks it's playing with brushes, but, you know, anything with brushes is jazz. What is a stylistic convention of jazz? How can we make that really clear to kids? So if they're going in their statement of intention, I've reimagined this work to be jazz-inspired, and all he's done is played Seven Nation Army with brushes. It's not hitting the brief, you know. And the last one, this tonality task, is one of my favourite things. I've done it for ages, and the kids love it. Here's a list of 5 songs that are 1, 4, 5, 6 in a major key. Transpose it into a minor key, record it, rewrite the lyrics. I had a student last term do a version of Don't Worry Be Happy, which he called Don't Worry Be Sad. That was a week and a half of work, and they notated it, they'd transposed it into a different major key and then transposed it into a different tonality, did like a little interval analysis of the melody and where they're going. So just an opportunity to apply all of the concepts that we're teaching in music language, but in something that's a bit more real world. And the last thing, using your IMTs, which Scott spoke about as well. I acknowledge that I'm in a very privileged position where I have a fantastic group of IMTs at my school, and I have that support in class with me at times. If you haven't got that resource, reach out to other classroom teachers, because there are more than just you in that situation, and there are creative ways to go about it. But if you do have great IMTs that your students are having lessons with, try and be really transparent with them about, here's where I'm going, and next week we're actually starting this stuff in rhythm, or we're going to be talking about texture, or we're going to be looking at different modes. In their lessons, they can inherently, explicitly use that language with students, and all of a sudden that multiple exposures is being hit. A kid is hearing 5 times in 1 week about the tonality of this piece. Hopefully one of them will hit home, maybe. In terms of accessibility, which I spoke about at the start, trying to include these kids into our program. I'm aware of time, and I'm speed talking. Having a range of exemplars. Often we talk about as teachers having an exemplar. Here is the 100% mark that you're going for. Here are 5 different statement of intentions. Tell me which one's the highest scoring and why. Rearrange them for me. Deconstruction and joint construction at a range of entry points. Sometimes this is a bit controversial, but yes, I will have a Year 12 student fill in the gaps of a paragraph as their entry point. Writing a full paragraph can be really overwhelming for somebody who's been speaking English for 3 months. Here is a list of words and here are the gaps. Try and fill them in, and that's our entrance point. Using simplified chord charts before developing complexity. This kid's in week 1 of term 1. Here are 2 chords that you can play in this song. All of a sudden they're playing with a band, they're feeling like they're a musician, they're playing every second chord in the progression, but they're included and they're feeling great, and they're going to go home and put more work in because they want to have that feeling again. Outcome 2, talked about the portfolio heaps, giving a template for that. Here are the questions I literally need you to answer. Instead of an overview, short, closed questions for that student to answer to really tick off what we need from them. Scaffolding the approach to reimagining, which we can have, as I spoke about, a live performance. And the discussion component of the SAC. If you've got a kid that's really anxious about discussing things and shaking, as I had a kid doing their Outcome 2 SAC last week, why can't they film a video of that? If I've done my authentication checks in regular conferences, I know it's this kid's work. That's going to be something that's taken off their plate. Last one for Outcome 3, I'm a big advocate for open book tests, which sometimes doesn't sit right with people, but we are not assessing kids' ability to memorise things. We're not assessing their ability to regurgitate information. If they have a list next to them with all of the formulas that I've taught them for scales and modes and chords, great. Can they apply that in an unfamiliar context? Yes, there is their S. Then when we get closer to the exam, we start teaching about how do we use exam time properly and how do we access that information without the book there. But what can we take off their plate to reduce that anxiety and stress and actually hone in on what the study design is asking us to assess? That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant work, Rachel. That's really fantastic. It seems that there is an emerging thing here that seems to wrap everything together. There seems that we are encouraging our students to take command of musical elements and musical materials to demonstrate personal voice, to do something creative with that. Now, how successfully the candidate or the student does that is, up to the assessors. But that's what we're trying to get them to do. We're trying to get them to grab the musical materials by the scruff of the neck and do something interesting that they are leading. Yeah? Just following up from Wendy's question, page 14 of 15 of the materials that were published on the VCEE website, end of year performance examination, 20 minutes for one performer, 25 minutes for 2 or 3 assessed performers, 30 minutes for 4 assessed performers, 35 minutes for 5 or 6 assessed performers. I would have said that that is a sufficiently meaty time frame that a group ensemble could demonstrate a really wide variety of command of musical language. Does that answer your question? I'm sure there's lots of different ways that we can actually solve this problem, so we might follow this up later and keep on moving. Any other burning questions that people would like to ask directly related to Rachel's presentation?
Hi, Tricia Baggs, Greater Shepparton. Just in the rules around non-assessed performers in groups, and we're allowed to currently have one adult in a group. Is that changing?
My understanding of the published material is that either teachers or students can be the non-assessed performers in that context, and there is no restriction to that. I think the expert assessors that are actually in the room are able to discern who is actually doing the heavy lifting and who's actually contributing actively to the performance and the relative success of that. I guess what you're kind of asking is if a candidate happened to, employ, professional musicians to accompany them and to make them sound good or more able to. I have faith in the expert assessors for each individual instrument that they can really discern microtimings, command of their instrument, how much they're contributing to that ensemble's success, and the relative professionalism of the other unassessed performers is consistently not considered. Obviously, issues that need to be considered as well if that's communication in performance between the main assessed performer and the accompanist is, not working, why that's not working, and who's contributing to that relative lack of success. Does that sort of answer your question?
Can I just say a couple of those questions about what actually happens in the exam room or the organisation associated with it will form part of the examination specifications like they do now, and that's really comes from our assessment operations people who will, so as far as how many pianos, what equipment's supplied, what you need to say in advance, but things like additional assessed performers, non-assessed performers, there will be a possibility of having an adult in there, a non-student performer, but and that I think our information already makes that clear. But the actual detail of that will be in the examination specifications that come out with the assessment criteria. So you'd be always looking at the assessment criteria themselves as well to work out what would be a good thing for your students to do, as Tim was just really saying. Thanks. Yeah, like all the other information to do with exams after this year's examination period, so December, January.
We might move on in the interests of time. Plenty more discussions to be had after the session, obviously. But now I would like to introduce Dr. Emily Wilson from the University of Melbourne. Please make her welcome.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks, everybody. It's so fantastic to be here. I think this is really exciting to have the first one of these since COVID, and lovely to see lots of familiar faces. So thank you so much to AMUS for organising the conference and for the opportunity to present. For those of you who don't know me, I work at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education along with my colleague over there, Suani, who many of you do know. And we work primarily with preparing pre-service teachers to teach. And at the moment, a big focus for us is working on the new study design. And they have all read the new study design, just like Scott has encouraged everybody to do. So what I'm going to do for the next 15 minutes is just share some ideas and starting points for how you might approach music, language and the elements, the concepts and compositional devices, primarily in relation to Outcome 3, but I'll also make some links to Outcome 1, performing, and Outcome 2, analysing for performance as well. So one approach to Outcome 3 is this idea of squeezing everything you can from a piece of music, which Anna alluded to a little bit earlier today as well. So working in this way can really help with what Rachel was talking about and making connections between different areas of the study design and also what students might be coming across in their instrumental lessons, and then linking that into what you might be doing in classroom music. So some principles for how you could go about this. So aim to integrate the outcomes wherever possible. So use the key knowledge and key skills in Outcome 3 to support the work in Outcome 1 and Outcome 2. And I know this is something that Lynn Morton talks about a lot as well. So we can use students' own programs for analysis, and this is something they do need to do in Outcome 1 and Outcome 2, but it can also be used to support their work in Outcome 3. So approaching the music, language, the elements of music, the concepts and the compositional devices in a musical context really strengthens connections to real world practice and really makes students see the point of what it is they're doing, because it's actually making them be better musicians. They can learn a lot through performing, composing and listening, and particularly using those music language concepts in creative activities really embeds them and really helps them shift into a really deep understanding of what it is that they're doing. So the principle is sound before sign, and I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in a contemporary context in a moment. But at MGSE, we talk a lot about this idea of building a teacher toolkit and the need to draw on multiple approaches and pedagogies in our teaching and not having a one-size-fits-all. So I'd really encourage you to do that with any of these ideas. That, and similar to what Rachel said, is it's all about what works for you and your students in your context. So a little bit more about sound before sign in a contemporary context. And I think the first thing I'd say, it is different to repertoire, that popular musicians learn differently to Western art musicians, and we can take some of those ideas into music language. So Lucy Green's principles of how popular musicians learn have been around for 20 years now. There's a big body of research that supports their efficacy for use in classroom music, particularly for supporting engagement. But I think one of the things that really came out of her research was the development of oral skills from doing that, learning to play by listening and copying recordings. So that's something that we can then pick up and make that transfer for students encountering something in a musical context through to really unpacking and being able to understand the concepts that then underpin that. So she did some later research, which was called Hear, Listen and Play, and she's got a 2014 book out which looks at how you can specifically develop those oral skills and some teaching strategies to do that, and that is in a contemporary music context. So this basic idea of hear, listen and play, we can add some things to it. So we all know how important singing is, that idea of naming what they're playing, the notating, documenting, and also the importance of creating. So documenting is something that's new in this study design, and on page 14 it is defined, and it says conventional staff notation, letter names, graphic notation, rhythm grids, chord symbols, tab, annotated track listings, and then it says as appropriate to the musical situation. So lots of those are appropriate to a musical situation in a contemporary context. So I've got a couple of examples to share with you. For any First Nations people here today, I am about to share some images and voices of deceased people, and we know Archie Roach's family have given permission for us to share his name, his image and his music. So as you know, Archie Roach, a Gunjat Mara and Bundjalung songman and storyteller, passed away recently. So we had a class recently and we did a learning sequence based around his song Down City Streets. So the first thing that I asked our students to do was to hum the root notes of the chords for the song, and then we got the instruments out and we had it go up playing them. So we happened to have guitar, ukuleles and or xylophones around, so that's what we grabbed. We can have a listen in a moment, and you might like to get a virtual piano app on your phone out if you happen to have one on you. We also had a discussion about the cultural and the historical context of the song. So it was written by Archie's wife, Ruby Hunter, and it's an autobiographical story of her experiencing homelessness and alcoholism. And so Ruby was also a member of the Stolen Generations, and it is really does highlight the terrible Indigenous disadvantage in this country. So let's have a listen and just see if you can hear those root notes of those chords.
Down city streets I would roam. I had no bed, I had no home. Crawled out of bushes early morn. Used newspapers to keep me warm. Then I'd have to score a drink, start me up, help me to think.
So what we did next is we wrote those root notes of the chords up on the board, and we started talking about chord quality. So they aren't all major chords, but then we started a discussion about, well, what tonality or scale is this built on? And in particular, if we're in A, which I think that we are, then what's going on with that G major chord? So then that led on to a conversation about, well, if this is built on a Mixolydian scale, then G major is the triad on the 7th degree of that mode. So some things that could then lead on from that, just unpacking that music music language is ask them to write out those chords. It could be in notation, they could be writing it out in letter names, they might like to write a chord diagram. The same thing with the scale is writing out a mixolydian in notation, in letter names, whatever happens to be the most appropriate for those students. And if I needed to teach mixolydian explicitly, I would do it at that point, but it's on that just-in-time need-to-know basis, and it has come from that particular musical context. There's some really great cover versions of Down City Streets. One of them was done by Archie's wife Ruby Hunter with the Australian Art Orchestra, and Emma Donovan and the Putbacks have also done another version recently. So we could ask a comparison question. So the study design does say compare the ways in which different performers have reinterpreted and reimagined works in performance, and then you might pick out some elements that were sort of coming through strongly, things like tone, colour, rhythm, tempo and contrast, and that analysis can then also get linked back to their reimagined work. So really understanding, well, what are other performers doing to reimagine these works, and really, you know, that maximum variation that people have been talking about earlier, and then students can start to bring that back to their work, so that they're really aiming for something is quite original and creative what they're doing, rather than sort of being a bit limited perhaps by what they come across on YouTube. So let's have a little listen. So here's a little bit of the Ruby Hunter and the Australian Art Orchestra. And a little bit of Emma Donovan.
Crowed out of bushes, early morn.
So this is the template that we use for analysis with our students. I've started populating it here with the elements, concepts and compositional devices in the music language that have just come through in Down City Streets, and you could also use it as a template for a listening journal. So at this point we could also add a creative task, so perhaps something like using the triads of A, G and D major, and then a mixolydian scale or even just a major pentatonic scale, and creating a short piece like that. It could be acoustically in groups, it could be using a digital audio workstation. So my second example is called A Way Back, and it's written by Lachlan Davidson, who's a Melbourne composer and musician, and actually was the head of jazz right here at PLC. So it was recorded by the Whiz Bang Orchestra in 2005, and I was talking to Lorraine Milne recently, who wrote the kit, about it, and she reminded me of this kit, and I went, oh, this would be a great one for the VCE conference. So I started having a proper read of it, and then I realised it was recorded by Ballarat High School kids in 2005, and then I had a proper look at the front cover, and look who you see kneeling down in the middle of the front row, who has really not changed very much since 2005. So it's a really good example that I think would make a terrific reimagined work. It's also a post-1990 Australian work, and it could also be an ensemble, particularly if you're doing something that might be a class ensemble. So it's riff-based, and it was composed to be reimagined by school students. So Lachlan encourages students and or teachers to construct their own arrangement using the musical materials, which are the riffs, the melody, the harmony, and the improvisation is also included. It's got a score and parts and the teaching kit, which are all available from the Australian Music Centre, which we've been hearing a lot about this afternoon, but really is a fantastic resource. The other thing the Australian Music Centre has is, because they are based in Sydney, they've got a lot of resources for the HSC in New South Wales, and HSC has had a post-2000 requirement for students to have works for them. So there's all those things there that can be really helpful for us in Victoria. So some ideas for scaffolding listening responses, which actually links into what Rachel was just talking about with giving multiple choice and really helping students develop their music language that way. So these listening grids, this is one of Neril Jennett's greatest inventions. We've used them extensively with primary school students right through to adults, and they're really helpful for focusing on oral discrimination, reducing cognitive load, and also reducing the English literacy requirements, and instead focusing on the musical requirements and developing developing that specialist music terminology. So the idea is that students circle what they hear, and then they can write a sentence for each element, or they can just explain verbally what they've circled. So by having multiple choice, they're able to deal with multiple elements at the same time, which is something that is really tricky, and also give it a much fuller response than if they haven't got that scaffolding. So they can really hold on to those things and then explain a little bit more about what they've heard, and then perhaps link it back to the musical examples. So this is a simple grid, and it's something that you could use with year 7 or 8 depending on your context, but it's still useful in VCE, particularly if you need a refresher or you do want to address multiple elements at once. So let's have a little listen to a way back, and you can do some imaginary circling of what you can hear. Okay, so don't be put off by how challenging that was. There is a simpler version that is much slower and has also got a more simple melody. So this grid here is still multiple choice, but you've got the structure given. You can't actually see that on the screen, but there is a QR code there, but there's also, I'll repeat it at the end as well. There's also a recording by the Whiz Bang Orchestra in that kit, so you've then got opportunities for a comparison as well. So if we want to keep pulling the music language out, is we can then look at the 7th chords that are in this piece. It's got a suspended 4 chord in it. It's got a great melody, and perhaps you could pull a bar or 2 out and use that for a melodic dictation. You could also have a conversation about the tonality or the scale. It is in 7/4, and irregular meters aren't in the study design, but just like lots of people have said, that doesn't mean that you don't use them in your class. It just means that they're not going to end up in the final written and oral examination. So a way back has got a full score and parts. It's got that loose head solos head form, so it really lends itself to rearranging it and reimagining it. And Lachlan says there's no reason to limit this piece to this form. I see many other possibilities and would hope other musicians might find many others. However far away you go, I hope you find a way back. And my last point is also about instrumental music teachers. So I think that the skills in outcome 3 really need to be developed in instrumental music lessons as well, particularly developing those oral skills right from the moment that students are beginners, but obviously appropriate to the sorts of music languages that they're encountering at that point. And then by the time they get to VCE, they've got well-developed oral skills, and then perhaps it becomes more about the naming, notating and documenting some of those concepts to then unpack them for a VCE context. So thank you so much for listening. Please get in touch. We love to hear from you all the time, and this is the advertising section of my speech. So we are always looking for people to take our students for placement. So if anybody is keen to have some really fabulous pre-service music teachers, Sue and I would both love to hear from you. I know that there's some really terrific webinars coming up. So Scott is doing a couple that are online, and also Lynn Morton is presenting some for ASME in term 4, unpacking the VCE study design. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emily. Please put your hands together for Emily, Rachel and Scott, our wonderful presenters. We've been called out for afternoon tea. Happy to keep the conversation going if people have burning questions. Does anyone want to open Pandora's can of worms with me about improvisation in the context of this subject? Just throwing it out there. Anyone, any biters? Love to have the conversation. Back in here at 3:30 p.m. Good people of Melbourne. That is in 10 minutes time. Go grab a coffee, go grab something to eat. See you back here in a hot 10 minutes. Thank you.